Okay.
All right. All right, got a few people coming in, watching the numbers go up here. So as usual, go ahead and jump in the chat anytime and introduce yourself and where you're calling in from. Anything else interesting that you want to add would be great. Drinking water today. Thought about making it a true happy hour, but I decided against that.
Yes, I think more meetings might be more interesting if that were the case, but well,
Keep hydrating, right? Okay, so about another 30 seconds or so, and we'll go ahead and get started. Generally, by the end of slide 2, we got get people to
full audience.
Okay. So I think we'll go ahead and kick things off with the usual introduction. So hello everybody, I'm Bill Conforti with Association Analytics. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the very last installment in this virtual discussion series where we bring together leaders and learners each week in a fun and engaging sessions aimed at optimizing results, staying relevant in these challenging times, and learning some cool stuff in the process. So stick around till the end where we'll inform you kind of how to keep in touch. We're going to be launching an all new series that will kick off after ASAE Annual. Okay, so we're going to wrap things up in this series by getting back to basics. Sorry about that. We're joined today by our good friends from Proximo, and we're going to be talking about two closely related foundational topics, data governance and data cleanup. So David from Proximo is going to educate you on these important topics and tell you how to get things started. So as always, we'll have a recording for the session today. It's going to be available on the registration site from the old series, and Brian will post a link for how you can figure out how to download those recordings. But the best sessions in the series, and we've done a lot of them now, have been the most interactive. So please don't be shy about joining in the conversation. Ask your questions in the Q&A, and share your experiences in the chat. The more participation we have, the more fun it'll be, and the more we'll all learn. So if you haven't already introduced yourself, looks like a lot of you have, please go ahead and do that in the chat. And if you haven't done it, please set your chat to, I'm going to do it right now, to all panelists and attendees. Right? Otherwise, it'll just come to the panelists. Okay, so speaking of panelists, today's panel is a small one. It'll just be David and I. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Bill Conforti, Senior VP of Strategy and Solutions with A2. Most of my time I spend, helping to improve our product, which is called Acumen, and the services that we offer around that to help our clients and prospects get the most value from their investments. So joining me today is David Ricciardi, President and CEO of Proximo, a trusted partner of Association Analytics. So David's experience spans 30 years and has led him to build, manage, and utilize large databases in industries as varied as financial, automotive, pharma, and healthcare. While David still works heavily in the corporate world, he has for 20 years worked with large associations in science, health, and advocacy sectors. He founded Proximo, an information services company, in 1997 to help clients with data strategy, warehousing, integration, and analytics. He spends most of his time now as an advisor to clients, helping them to plan and execute on strategies that allow them to leverage data to make better business decisions. So let's look at the agenda quickly. So now, so we've got a few more attendees on the call. Now's a great time to grab a drink. If you haven't done that and you want to partake, make this a happy hour. It is the last one in the series, so if that makes a difference to you, feel free to go ahead and do that. So on the agenda then, first we'll have a quick tangent right off the bat, kind of our just for fun slide, which we do each week. Then we're going to jump into some educational and practical material on data governance. So that'll be a quick look at how DG and analytics complement each other. An education on the basics of data governance with David, some real use cases of governance in action, and then we'll wrap things up with some practical tips on how you can get started, even if you haven't done much with governance already, and basically how you can learn to put what you learned today into action. All right, just for fun. All right, so what is all this? So on the left are some of the things that we've spent a lot of time talking about, right? We've talked about things that we, since we kicked off in March, we were talking about ways to stay relevant and optimize business during the pandemic. And what we're going to kick off the next webinar series with are some of the lessons learned and some of the positive business changes that were made during the pandemic that you can carry forward and improve your business moving forward. So in that spirit, I want to talk about things that we've done on a personal level, during this time off, right, in air quotes. And so basically, what have we been up to in March that's been productive, right? So on the left are things we spent a lot of time talking about. It's like, watching a bunch of Netflix, eating good food, making a lot of cocktails, including some that we drank on these calls. And for some of us, myself included, probably, gaining a few pounds. And so on the right, on the flip side are some things that many of us have done to kind of make things better, right? They've been positive changes. So I want to hear about your, right, there we go. Good call, Julie. So I want to hear about some of your experiences as they relate to positive changes that you've made during this interesting time, right? So maybe some people have gotten in great shape, not me, but some have, I'm sure. Learned something new, a new language or a skill that you use for work. Anybody that accomplished something big in a home improvement project or something like that. I have a few, small accomplishments in that area, but generally nothing that I would brag about too much. Maybe you figured out how to balance work and educating your kids, right? So maybe you're thinking about homeschooling or something like that. If anybody has any wisdom for the group in that area, I certainly would love to hear it. So I watched a guy build a okay, so yeah, so along those lines, right? Anything that you can share with the group, if it's really a really funny story, or if it's particularly inspirational, we'd love to have you come on as a panelist at the end and tell us all about it. So anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually, I'm going to put David on the spot, and I didn't ask him this before, but anything that you'd want to share with us on the left or the right side of the slide here that you've been up to in the last few months?
There have been a number of cocktails, a lot of those. So that's been one thing. But I have to say I haven't been too bad. We've been blessed to have a home gym. So rather than just strictly drink and eat ribs, we've actually managed to work out and stay relatively healthy during this period. So I'll give a back pat for that one.
Awesome, cool. Maybe we can do something with some of these results here. See a few yard projects. Mike has started yoga. That's pretty exciting. Hopefully we can find the time to keep that up, going forward. So, okay. So thanks for that, David. Keep those coming in the chat. Always interesting to hear about what people are up to. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So we're going to talk very briefly about kind of how governance and analytics are complementary. So they can be, but they don't have to be sequential, and they very often are complementary and done in parallel. So governance programs, of course, enable not just analytics, but really anything that you want to do with your data as an organization. But at the same time, what we find, from our clients that are doing these kinds of things in parallel is that analytics it highlights a lot of the use cases, a lot of the benefits, some of the potential risks around governance or the lack of governance. So what I like to say is that it kind of takes it from something that is largely an academic pursuit, right? And it's kind of in the abstract, to something that's very tangible and something that you can see in your day-to-day work. So here, this is kind of an illustration of the concept that I was just talking about. So when we think about analytics, what do we want, right? We want our data to be consistent. We want it to be accurate. We certainly want it to be trusted. We want it to be in context, right? So that kind of gets to common business language and things like that. And of course, we want it to be current, right? So it has to be updated. It has to be updated every day, or maybe even more frequently in some cases. And then we have to also be diligent about making sure that all of our source system data is, of course, updated with by our members as well. And then on the bottom are what some have called the pillars of data governance, the things that we're concerned about most often. And David's going to jump into these in more detail later. But data quality, of course, right? That's maybe the one of the #1 things that we hear a lot about. Privacy and security has been always kind of a big deal, but a bigger deal, since what was it, May 2018 or so, with GDPR and definitions, right? So that gets to the idea of looking at our business data in context. So, there's a lot of anecdotes about this, different definitions of a member, a lapsed member, a meeting attendee, and things. But the idea is that when you are looking at a spreadsheet, or you're looking at a chart or a graph, you need to know what you're looking at. It means that everything has to be in context. Then we also care about ownership, right? So who is the person or the persons that are responsible for that data source or data set, and the maintenance of it, keeping it current and keeping it accurate, and all those kinds of things. And then of course usage. What should the data be used for, and is it fit for that purpose, right? And in between there are people, right? I mean, all of the staff at your association. There are the processes that you have in place and that you'll put in place and improve as a result of your governance. And then of course the technology and the tools that you use to kind of keep that all together. So as we go to the poll questions, I want to ask David, looking at the 3 boxes in the middle there, people, process, and technology. I think I know what you'll say, but which one would you say is most important there?
It absolutely, for me, is the people. Always, if the processes are good, you still need people to follow them, and the technology doesn't matter at all. if there's not people that know what they're doing, look at using it. So always comes down to people.
Agreed. I think we probably would all agree on that one. If anyone has a different answer, would love to hear your rationale for that in the chat. So anyway, so I'm going to focus then on the bottom, right? Which is quality, privacy, business definitions, ownership, and usage. And that's going to segue to our first poll question, which is, when you think about your association's data, what concerns you the most? Okay, so our choices are quality, privacy and security, definitions, and common language. Something else, and if you have other, you can write that in the chat, or really don't think about data very much. Of course, no one's going to answer that.
Hope nobody answers that.
All
one,
thinking
right?
about data. Yeah, if people are being honest, I would expect there would be a few of those, but best data use. Yeah, good. All right. Let's give it about another 10 seconds or so. We'll put up the answers. Okay. Quality, yeah. Privacy, other. Okay, 0% for I don't think about data. So that's great. Good for you, for all the people that are on the call. Hope everybody was answering that honestly. Sure you were. But yeah, that's the other 3. We do hear about, that's usage and ownership. Ownership's kind of a sticky thing when you get into the actual nuts and bolts of putting together your policies, but it's not that often is your main concern going into it. So anyway, that's so we'll kind of circle back to some of those results as we go through. Okay, yeah. So Keith is concerned about both. Yeah, of course. So that's kind of the nature of poll questions, right? It gets to what we talked about last week is you can only you have to be deliberate about how you design your poll questions. And of course, we didn't take that much effort to to design these in exactly the right way. But now, as we learned last week, you have the ability to be a lot more unstructured, right, in your approach to surveys and polling. All right. So with that, I'm going to have a couple more things to talk about here. The first are Mark Lowry's 4 Ps of data governance. So these they're making their second appearance in the series. They're people, plan, process, and policy. So of course, people is first. Who are going to make the decisions? If you have those great processes, who's going to manage them, and who's going to carry them out? Who's going to be the gatekeeper, right? The owner for the data and the reports. Processes are really all of the decisions that you'll make, during governance, which are, how a request going to be submitted and logged, and decisions tracked, and communications, and all of that. The policy are the rules that are needed to protect your data and increase the overall value of the data. And then, of course, the plan is how you're going to design and implement all of that. So that is a very simplistic, kind of explanation of those things. And of course, they're not Mark Lowry's 4 Ps, but this is a slide that makes it into almost every discussion that we have about data governance. I had to find a way to slide those in here. All right. And so again, as we wrap this up, the idea with governance is that it improves the value and quality of your data while reducing the confusion and ultimately the risk. So this is kind of why we're here and why we're talking about this, and why this is such a popular topic that has kind of broad appeal. A couple of resources quickly. This is the data analytics maturity model. It's not strictly about data governance, but it certainly includes a lot of the elements of data governance. Just wanted to highlight this as a resource. If you haven't looked at this before, it's something that's available for free on our website. It's a five-stage model, and basically it'll tell you where you are right now and try to give you some high-level advice on how to get to the next level. Again, it's focusing on analytics broadly, but a big part of it is governance. And then finally, specific to governance, the ultimate guide to data governance for associations. So this is also available for free in the resource section of our site. To encourage you to go and take a look at that. And a lot of what David's going to talk about in detail are there, and it gives you at least a template, right, for the things that you need to be concerned with if you wanted to try to tackle something like this on your own. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to David to teach us about data governance.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Bill. And now I'll just see if I can get the slides to advance. But while they're trying to, I will just start kind of doing a very quick intro. Bill, you already gave a good overview of who I am, so I won't belabor that too much. But my company is Proximo. We've been in business for 23 years now. There we go. Thank you very much. And everything we do is around data. And as you can see, just, I won't go into everything that we do, but data strategy and governance kind of tops that list. Proximo has been around for 23 years. Like Bill said, I've been doing this for 30 years. So from every now and then, I kind of seem to have pearls of wisdom to give to folks. This is a small sampling of some of our association clients, but we've worked with a lot of associations on the topic of data governance and data in general. And it's through those relationships that we've had over the course of many years that kind of drives a lot of what we're going to go over today, including just what I would kind of frame out as a typical association. So as I kind of go through this, just kind of, take a look at this and see if you've ever had any of these kind of discussions internally. Very often so you'll produce a report, somebody else will produce a report or a dashboard, and you wind up looking at it. And invariably, somebody seems to say, we have about 11,000 members. What does this report only say 7,500 on it? You get something like that, or, somebody says, this report says we've got 650 lapsed members last year. How do we define lapsed again? Or you get something like, well, here's a data element, a demographic for members that we used to have, but half of the members don't have anything for last year. When did we change that process? If you've ever had a discussion like that, I won't be surprised. And really what these things kind of come down to, these are symptoms of a broader problem, and they're usually not symptoms of a technology problem or a system problem. It usually comes down to governance. Like if you use that example I just had before, where you kind of sit and say, what's a lapsed member, or insert whatever term you want in there. That's not a system problem. That's really like a knowledge gap problem. And this really comes down to processes. How are you defining things, and how are you sharing those definitions out there for everybody to take a look at? Oops.
Oh, sorry, David, that was my fault.
Okay, there we go. It'll probably just take just a slight bit of time to get back to here. But what it comes down to is, right, it's that process, like I said, it's not really the system problem, but it's really understanding what's in the system. Sorry, it's going a little slowly here now. But looking at that system and saying, what's in the system, what does it mean? And, really understanding how does a piece of data, whatever that data is, get in there, and how is it updated? Who has that control around it? Those are really the broad problems that underline a lot of data that is in an association. And then you really have to figure out, once you identify those symptoms, those problems, what do you actually do about them? I seem to keep losing control of the screen here. My apologies.
There you go.
There we go. Am I moving again? Everybody likes to be on a webinar where you get some dead air. So do you want to advance me, Bill, here? Because I don't seem to be getting this. Oh, there we go. Okay, so apologies, everyone. A couple of technical glitches. What is data governance? So obviously that's the topic of this entire hour. So let's just kind of dive into that a little bit more. So data governance is really a framework for an organization that standardizes how data is managed. And the best way to kind of think about data governance, without trying to sound very, very theoretical, it's kind of like a meta process. It's a process by which you have processes that manage your data. You don't want to think about data governance as really, well, we have got a bunch of bad member addresses and we have to update them. That's a tactic. That's something that, governance kind of points out to you and gives you processes for how you're going to update it. But really, governance itself is focused on identifying the issues and managing those issues. So it's really around policies. You want to understand who can create and update data, who approves changes to not only data, but the processes around those data, and who's also responsible for enforcing these policies, and then monitoring the data to make sure that nothing gets messed up. And also that you're checking on the quality. A good data governance program will increase your quality, so you're really having the impact that you expect to be having. So the important things really to think about these things, because the first two bullets are really around what data governance is. And I do admit that when you kind of talk about it in that way, it can sound very, very theoretical, but there's a real reason you want to do it. And those have very tangible benefits to you. A good data governance program really can drive growth at your association. Better member experiences, because the members and the staff have access to consistent, accurate, and reliable analytics. that informs what you really should be doing. It informs your decision-making process. And so, right, keeping those things in mind, consistency, accuracy, and reliability, that's what everybody wants. I don't think anybody ever says, oh, no, we want to have bad data. So if you really want to get these things in place, data governance is really what helps facilitate that. And the second part of it is not just, having good access to data, but when you actually have control of data and you understand where it is and where it goes and how it's being used, you really are building in protections against improper use of data or, accidentally sending data to somebody that shouldn't have it. And as we all know, protecting data is very, very important nowadays. This is not even the environment we were in 5 years ago, much less 10 years ago. You really need to keep a tight control of your data to make sure that that member data or whatever data it is doesn't wind up in the wrong hands.
Dave, maybe a couple questions here quickly.
Sure.
So in terms of the policies for like the second bullet there, who creates, approves, et cetera, that's kind of like the usage and ownership pillars or blocks that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Do you find that that's more often a single person, or is it a small handful, or is it like dispersed, throughout the organization?
Yeah, and the answer is a little bit of all of that. So I'm going to be we're definitely going to be going into what we think is the right organizational structure. But I will say to do data governance and really manage quality, a lot of people have to be involved. So it's not like you've got a department and they're the only ones who are managing the data. But that having been said, you really you should have somebody who's in charge of the data governance process that then is linked into all of these other folks that are managing data throughout the organization. So now it can get more complicated than that. Is that a full-time person, a part-time person? And we'll kind of dive into all of that. But I think that's how I would answer that question for you.
Sure, thanks. And then the second one is, and I think maybe you're going to talk about this later, but I've always been a little bit sketchy on the difference between data governance and data management. So how do you, what's the difference between those two?
Right, and the way I would look at that is, data management is really the updating of the data. And so I used that example before, we've got a bunch of bad member addresses, how do we fix those? Data governance is that process by which you're going to identify that you've got a problem. And then data management is fixing that problem. And then also once it's fixed, making sure it doesn't happen again. So you put the right policies in place to make sure that you don't wind up with a bunch of bad addresses after the fact. So the two of them work together. But they are separate things. One's your processes, and one is the actual actions that you take. Okay,
cool. And one last thing. This is like maybe a question for you, or maybe just a question for the audience. And I do understand this one is a bit tricky and maybe sensitive, so maybe we can't share anything things that we might otherwise share. But just in terms of like the last one, we're talking about data privacy, data security. Does anyone have a the high level, right? A case where your association dealt with something stemming from improper use of data, or something about anything around data privacy that you could share, right? Because we talk about it a lot, but we know at a high level, right? And we knew in the abstract, right? There are lots of risks, related to data privacy. I'm just curious if that's like really been an acute issue for anyone on the call here. And that includes you. If you have an example that you could share that's not confidential, I'd be curious to hear it.
That's very, very interesting. So let me try to answer that as if we could go through a few more a few more slides. We'll get to some examples that we've got. But while everybody kind of like puts those things into the chat, and I think we've got a poll question coming up in another slide, I'll just kind of go into this just a little bit around why do you do data governance? And we've kind of touched on this when we were going through what data governance is. But the reason behind data governance is that it can make a real difference. And just very simply put, there's a lot of benefits to trusting data. When you have trust in data, then you feel comfortable going ahead and making decisions and advocating for your positions. As you kind of decide as an organization what you're going to do. Those benefits are really, really important. And again, speaking to the privacy and the confidentiality of data, managing that data is really a concern right now that is both ethical and regulatory. Your customers expect you to protect their data, period. It's not, nobody, that's exactly what every customer expects implicitly. And you've also got a number of government bodies that are enforcing those things now. So you're seeing laws passed every year around managing data. It's just not an option. And without a governance program, if somebody comes and says, we think your data got out there, and you can't say, well, we don't know what happened or how it got that way, that's not a good answer. That's not going to be acceptable. So, yeah, do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay,
so here's a question, and it's a familiar one because we've asked it before. Does your organization have a data governance policy? Okay, and the same choices as before. So it's yes, not in progress, on the radar, no time soon, or what is this policy thing you're talking about? Yeah, so we asked this question back in May, and we've kind of actually reviewed the answers as well once or twice in the last couple of weeks. And at a high level, about 20% have a policy already in place. Another 40% had either started it or it was on the radar. So all of this to say that back in May, it was already a popular topic, with some broad support. So we want to kind of revisit that, just see if today's audience kind of lines up with the ones that were on the call back then. Okay, so give you another few seconds on that.
Yep.
Okay, we can go ahead and put the results on the radar. 47.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so it's pretty close. We have a few less that actually have something already in place, but overall, the numbers for on the radar or have already started something is it's pretty comparable to what we've seen previously. And so the point being is that this is it's a timely topic. It's always timely, right? But right now, maybe a little bit more than usual. And so the rest of the time is going to be more practical. So we know that there's broad interest and that it's something that's top of mind for many of us. So how do we actually do something if it's on the radar? How do we get it into practice? And if we've already started, how do we kind of move things along and take it to the next level?
Yeah, those are very interesting numbers. And I think this will start to help out for those folks that are like, have it on the radar or further out, because we've talked about what it is at this point and why. And so now let's start to get into some of the practical aspects of it around what you're, actually doing data governance. Oops, I went by a little too fast. Oh, no, there we go. Okay, there we go. Those are the ones. So we talked about the 4 Ps before. And so I won't belabor these too much, but you'd have got, this is how these different Ps kind of fit in practically. Your policies are managing the information assets. So those are the things that you put in place, the documents by which you're saying this is what we do and what we're not allowed to do. This is how we go about doing things. You've got your processes, which really then defined at a very practical level what happens when something happens. So in other words, it could be everything from, as minute as a member calls in and wants to update their information to we have a process around what happens if we see a new government regulation, for instance. People. We talked about people are the most important part of all this. You can have all the policies and procedures in the world, but people are the ones who need to act upon those. And they're the ones who are actually managing the data, which helps ensure that it's going to be quality data. And lastly, you do need a plan, and we're going to get into some aspects of what a plan looks like later on. But you do need to have a plan in place to really manage this program, not only rolling it out, but making sure that it actually lives on after it's been rolled out. These are the capabilities that you really need to deliver on data governance. Without these elements, you're really not going to have much of a program to speak of. And so now let's talk a little bit about who does data governance, and Bill will kind of speak a little bit more of the topic that you brought up before about, within the organization, who does these things. So a couple of things though, before I kind of get into what I would call like a sample org chart. This is something that, I'm very passionate about. I've had conversations before where I kind of ask, well, who's in charge, of data governance, data quality, and everybody kind of looks around and goes, well, we're all in charge of quality. Well, yes, that, is true to some extent, but if everyone's in charge, then no one's in charge. When something goes wrong, you don't really know who to talk to. On the flip side of that, and this is, what we were talking about before, it is an organization-wide process. So a lot of people need to be involved in the process, but somebody has got to be managing it and has to be in charge. I kind of use the analogy, if you have a data governance program, without having somebody in charge of it, it's like having a marketing department with no VP of marketing. Otherwise, you just have a lot of people who are sending emails out and making website postings with no overarching strategy. So got to have somebody in charge, and then other folks are definitely involved in it. The other thing to really keep in mind is that it doesn't end at your four walls. It really has got to go out to everybody that's touching your data. You've all got vendors now. A lot of platforms that are being used at associations are cloud-based, which means it's data that is managed by people externally. And you've got any number of partnerships in place, collaborative partnerships with other organizations where you've got data sharing going on. You need to know what everybody else is doing when they've got your data. So you need transparency. You've got to be able to tell these folks, this is what we expect, and now you've got to show that you're actually doing it.
Hey, David?
Yes.
That's a quick question on that. Mm-hmm. When you say just advice for, I think many of the people on the call are working with external mm-hmm. vendors. Mm-hmm. When you say that the vendors need to be transparent, mm-hmm. Specifically though, what do we need to ask our vendors, or what do we need to ask them to provide us? I mean, is it something in writing, or is it just the nature of the work between us, or what do you mean by that?
It's both. I mean, I would say I'm always in favor of having something on paper. So in other words, it's built into the contract that not only has cyber protection and all of that sort of stuff, but also say you are only allowed to use this data for the following purposes. So you've got to have the usage of it in there. And if you've got a real data governance program where you want to have visibility into who's updating it and when they're updating it, they really need to be part of the process. Imagine having something like if you have a vendor that's updating data and that is going to flow into you, okay, and they change their process for whatever reason. It may be legitimate, it may not be legitimate, but if they change their process, that has an impact upon you. So if you're gonna have a policy in place that says when a change is made, here's the channels it needs to go through, your vendors, if they're gonna contemplate a change, need to include you in the process. So you really need to they have to be part of an extended workforce when it comes to data quality. That's what I would say would be the ideal world.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. And the last note that I'll put on here, because I will hear this sometimes, they think, data's technology and data's in systems. And yes, data is in systems, and it is, there's a lot of technology involved, but ideally data governance is not owned by IT. IT does not use the data. IT doesn't input the data. They're managing systems and they're managing uptime and all that sort of stuff, but they're not the business. So they have a stake in it and they're a part of the solution. But ownership of data governance is best on the business side. Okay. And so what do you wind up needing here? And so we're starting with the basics before I get into the org chart. We do recommend, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but a program charter. This is a document, does not have to be a long one, that is shared throughout the organization, and it talks about the broad expectations. And, you know, while just paraphrasing the sentiment of this charter, and it may vary a little bit from organization to organization, but it really will lay out the concept that data governance is a key driver of our approach to data management. Okay, and so it pays to be very, very clear about that, and being able to have something that you can kind of hang your hat on, and something that's got sign off as a program charter that's got sign off from executives. So yes, praise. This is Stephen. Okay, okay. So let's get a little bit into what you need, and now we're going to talk about people. And what I'm showing here is kind of like our ideal version for a supporting organization. Let me go through each one of these roles, and I want to be very clear with everybody that, you know, let's just talk through what these roles are before everybody looks at this and thinks this is a gigantic organization. Okay. These roles are necessary, and then how they're filled is something completely separate. We always recommend a data governance council. This is a small, relatively small council, but it is a strategic body. It doesn't meet every day. It's not dealing with all the issues, you know, tactically or on the ground. But sometimes there are things that need to be escalated, and sometimes there are things that come down from the board or from legal that the council needs to make decisions on. So this is really your decision-making body when it comes to data governance. You can think about them almost like a board, with the data governance program manager kind of like being the CEO of the data governance organization. This is the person who's responsible for saying, okay, we've got this direction. We've got to identify the problems, and how do we design policies and processes and procedures around addressing those problems and maintaining quality. What are our quality goals? All of these kinds of things. Your data governance program is going to spawn off multiple projects to clean up data and make sure that data is quality and is trustworthy. The program manager, who's kind of managing all of that stuff, is working with people that we classify as data stewards and data custodians. You can kind of almost think about these as being like the business and the technical side of your data. A data steward is really much more business focused. When I'm looking at a particular piece of data, what does it mean? How do we define it? If we use a term, what does that term mean? Is everybody using the same term? If somebody says we want to do something with, you know, email addresses, where do we have email addresses across all of our systems and vendors? So you've got that business aspect of it, and then you've got your custodians who are really focused more on the system side of things. They may be working with multiple systems, and, you know, they're worried about tables and columns and data feeds that may connect systems together. Those all play into the data governance, but they work, so the stewards and the custodians work together, kind of in this triangular pattern with the data governance program manager. And now I see the chat going by, so, okay, all right.
All right, so Michael, if you get that sign made, we can all, you could probably sell that, right? We'll all get a copy of it.
I think you could put that up on like Amazon, like a Z shop, and people will buy that sign, yes. So these are the way in which all of these things kind of work together, all of these different roles. Now, I will touch upon, because I know we've probably got associations of different sizes on here. You know, you could spin up a very large data governance organization, but a lot of associations may not be so big. You do need somebody to be the program manager, and they're going to need to put time into it. It doesn't necessarily need to be a full-time role, though, but it is a role. And if you're thinking that somebody who's working, you know, already 60 hours a week is going to do the program manager job just in their spare time, that's not going to be practical. You've got to, you know, make sure that they've got some time allotted for it. Your stewards and custodians most likely are not full-time staff. They are probably already embedded in the organization. And these are just defined roles that may fit in very well with what they're doing already. And the council, these are your executives. You know, this council may be 3 to 7 people, we usually say, depending on how big the association is. But there's usually somebody like who may be a few folks from the C-suite, like the CIO, the head of marketing, the head of membership. People that have a real strong stake in data are probably part of your council, and they're only meeting like quarterly or something along this line. So that's really not a full-time job for those folks as well. So that's kind of like the organization, the ideal organization that is kind of put into place. Keeping my eye on the clock, I'm just going to start to accelerate through a couple of these here. Because when we start talking about what we need, that organization is also going to really work with several, we'll call them documents. But these are documents that are put in place that are shared throughout the organization. First is a data source catalog. That one's really kind of very super simple. It's just a listing of every place you store data. I have worked with a lot of associations where even if they're large and relatively sophisticated, they say, yeah, we have one, but we know it's missing a bunch of stuff. It's very tough to say we're going to be able to manage all of our data if you don't even have a list of what all your systems are. So that run is a pretty straightforward list, but definitely necessary. Then you get into something like a data dictionary. Data dictionaries, a lot of people have heard the terms, but they are listings of individual data elements across the organization. Member email address, work email address, home email address. You may get multiple entries on here because you probably store email address in a dozen systems. This is that catalog so that when you go and look for a piece of data, you know everywhere it is, okay? And your dictionary also defines things like, well, what's common data we have with it? What's the definition? What are the data types? All of that sort of stuff is in there. Then we get to a business glossary. Now, a lot of folks, most organizations I've seen do not really have business glossaries, but they are very, very important. A business glossary is really a set of definitions. Go back to my example from much earlier about a lapsed member. How do we define a lapsed member again? This would say business term lapsed member and say, here's the definition, the company definition of what that is. And also a few other things such as when did we make this definition? When was the last time it was approved and reviewed? It's not a good situation if you have 2 or more people in your association that use the term lapsed member, but use it to mean different things.
2 or more.
2 or more, right, exactly. 3, 4, 5. Those may be valid definitions, but if they are really different definitions, they should be called different things. Lapsed member, past members, whatever you want to call them, but they should have different terms. Okay, yeah, exactly, right there, Renee. Renewal, reinstate, exactly. Those are the kinds of things.
And this gets to that idea of looking at all of your analytics in context, right? So if your business glossary is not up to date and there isn't like a consensus definition of your key business terms, then it's really very difficult, if not impossible, to understand the right context when you're looking at your data.
Absolutely, right. Absolutely. And then that last thing that I've got on here is the project plan. So go back to our organization structure. You've got strategic direction. You've got your program charter. Your program manager then starts to lay out what the organization is going to do and in what order. This can be, as simple as things like, we're obviously on the plan, create the council, start the charter, things like that. Begin the data dictionary. Generally, we're recommending that you start with small parts of the business. You can't look at all the data you've got at once, but start with something, simple. We want to start with, core member data, name and address data, things along those lines. And we're going to pilot our program on a small data set, measure the quality, determine, how we're benchmarking that quality, do things that are going to improve quality, monitor quality, report on quality, things like that. That might be part of your plan. And then your plan is going to grow over time to include other parts of the organization. And your plan is ongoing. It never ends, much like marketing or something along those lines. You never stop marketing. You're never going to stop managing your data quality. Data governance is not something that starts and has an end. It ends when you go out of business, and hopefully nobody gets to that point. So it's an ongoing thing. There'll be more work to do up front before you kind of get to a place where you're in a good spot. But it is something that you really never stop doing. All right. And I think
all right, cool.
Another poll question. Go ahead.
So really quick, this is, I think, our last poll question. We got a few minutes left here. So who in your organization is responsible for privacy compliance? Right. So business, IT, no one, or I don't know. So just a few seconds on that one.
Yep. And while we do that, I will use that as a segue into no one on that list. I will, because those results will pop up in just a second, but I'll start to speak about this because we're going to just go through a couple of like really quick use cases about how a data governance process and organization works in the real world. And so this kind of typical use case we'll walk through is focused on data privacy. So last year, New York State passed the SHIELD Act, breach notification. And everybody should have it implemented by now if you've got any members that are in New York State. So if we look at our organization structure, something along these lines, and feel free to pop up the results at any point. But when you're sitting here, there we go. It's split. Okay, interesting. That's very, it's a three-way tie. Okay. I will say if you don't know who's in charge of privacy, that is an issue. That's something that should be, if somebody is in charge, if it's not known throughout the organization, that's not a great sign.
There might be a few more of those because I think a lot of people didn't answer. Looking at the numbers,
okay.
So maybe there's a few more that didn't know.
Didn't answer. So if we look at something like this, a new law is passed, and so this usually comes. I'll just keep talking. There we go. Usually, it's something like that might come from the council because it's a high-level organizational issue. Legal or compliance may have relayed this along. So the council says this is something we don't have an option. We've got to do it. They hand it off to the program manager who consults with various stakeholders to determine who owns personally identifiable information that would be impacted by this. The data stewards, once you know that PI, the stewards who are in charge of that PII are saying, well, let me look at my glossaries, let me look at my dictionary, where do we have this data? And then updating the processes, the SOPs, by which you manage that data to say if something happens, this is what's going to happen after that, and it's going to deal with the notifications that would be necessary. And your custodians are evaluating if there's any impact to IT systems that are storing those systems. I'll give a quick answer to that last question. PII is personal identifiable information. It's not a straight list of items. Usually it's items in conjunction with each other that allow you to identify a person explicitly, but name, address, email, phone number, those are like your core elements right there. Social security numbers and other types of identifiers could also fall into that list. So this is the way your data governance process would actually work in a real life example. I'll do one more quick one of these because we're running a little short on time here, but I think this is almost my last one. Marketing is always coming up with new ideas. Obviously, that's what they do to be able to grow membership, grow the association. So a third party requests the marketing department share data on a co-branded event. Terrific idea. Marketing knows what the data is necessary, but isn't sure who owns that data. Yeah. So we look at our organization again. The person from marketing that's come up with this wonderful partnership is probably going to talk to the program manager. Program manager is going to check on policies to just say, hey, we're about to share member data. What do our policies say about authorizing that data if we're allowed to share it? it may just be a cut and dried situation. Everybody agrees, yep, this is who needs to sign off on it. But if the program manager says this person needs to sign off and the marketing person says, no, they don't, that's something that gets escalated to the council, okay? Because now you've got different elements of the organization that don't agree with each other. That's a strategic management decision. But assuming that it all goes forward, the GUP program manager knows the data and can identify the stewards that are in charge of that data. The stewards then look at things like, what policies do we have around that data? Do we have opt-in policies that need to be updated? If so, they update procedures as necessary. The custodians are updating things like the data dictionary. If you create a new opt-in number 57, right? Where the yes/no controls the sharing with this co-branded event, that's got to go in the dictionary. So a year later, when somebody says, what does opt-in 57 mean? You actually can look at it and see how it came about, where it is, and who's managing it. So that's another way in which this practically gets used. So, and this is just, I'm going to plow through this here, Bill, because we got 5 minutes left on this. This is my last slide.
Okay, good.
Okay, but just, kind of in closing about data governance, and with anything that you're going to do that's new to an organization, a lot of people will like to think of WIFM, and a lot of people know what WIFM is, but just in case you haven't heard of WIFM, it's what's in it for me. Why does somebody in your organization care about data governance? So remember, going back to this question before, we got 11,000 members. Why does this number say 7,500? Just imagine a world in which you don't have to waste the next 4 hours of your day digging in to figure out why the number says 7,500. How much more efficient you can be if everybody was just on the same page and could agree on what the numbers were. Another example is, kind of going back to my marketing example, marketing is, going to come up with some sort of new customer analysis, and invariably they say, we want to analyze this data. And then they'll look around and say, where is the data and who owns it? And then that will spawn off a bunch of people kind of running around trying to figure out where it all is. Data governance is, really helps with efficiency. Stop wasting time having the same discussions over and over again about, where data is and what it actually means. And then it's about trust. Once, if you look at the number and it's going to be the right number, you can really make better decisions. You can't make good decisions based upon bad information. And with that, Bill, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you. Okay,
so yes, just some pro tips to kind of take us home here. So the first two were from David's talk. Think holistically, and that's like, it's an organization wide process, right? And that includes vendors that you're working with your source systems, as well as any vendors that would help you with implementing or designing your governance program. Start small. This 2 and 3 are related, right? Start small, but start now, right? I mean, this is something that's going to be continuous improvement over time. You'll never get it perfect right out of the chute, but it's really important, and it's a foundational kind of thing that that starting now is really the right move, and that applies anytime. But due to the circumstances we're in now, and in some ways, it's even more relevant. We talked about how analytics and governance go well together. They can and probably should be done in parallel. And lastly, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? So that means that it's going to be a process of continuous improvement. Don't expect that you're going to start this and get it done in a short amount of time. It's going to be really an ongoing process. So I'm going to ask Brian to put a few links in the chat. Those are the A2 resources page, where the governance guide, as well as the analytics maturity model can be found, and also a link to the Proximo site. There's a lot of good resources there as well, and of course it'll put you in touch with David and his team if you want to talk further about anything that he has taught us today. So I'm going to go then. I'm going to wrap us up here, but there was one question for a Mike, David, about metadata management tools. If like you showed us examples, and I know you guys use Excel and maybe even Word documents and things, but what are some of the other tools that that people could that associations can use? I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you anymore.
That's me. Okay,
there we
I
go.
hit my mute button before. I'll be brief on this, and I can follow up afterwards as well on this. A lot of associations start with spreadsheets because they're easy to kind of get going. There's a big market out there for various master data management. A lot of them are rather cumbersome and expensive. So you really want to do like an evaluation of what's right for your association and pick the one that's the right state. We do have something though that is more geared for associations and the typical association in terms of what its needs are versus a lot of those other platforms, most of which were built for corporate America in mind.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like my half answer to that, but
Okay.
I can follow up afterwards with a little bit more information to everybody.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. So thanks, David, for the education. Thanks to everyone in the audience. The comments were great, and appreciate all of your stories and your questions. We're going to have a brand new series that's kicking off on August 20th. We're going to kick it off with a discussion of the positive changes on the business side. Right, we won't talk about getting in shape and all of that, but the business side that changes we've made during COVID that are going to endure and help us do much better when things are quote unquote back to normal. Between now and then, there's a couple of things. There's the virtual meetup. Again, that's on the association brown bag. There's an Eventbrite invitation that Brian put in the chat. These sessions are mostly informal. They're led by the group, occasional guest speakers. That's a great chance to stay in touch with, or maybe even meet new like-minded colleagues. Again, there's a link there in the chat. And of course, visit us at ASA Annual. That's coming up next week. We're going to have some great content. There'll be chances to get a short demo, and you can help us raise money for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Washington, D.C. We're going to be donating a small amount for each person that visits us in our booth. And there may be an appearance by Chip the Owl, which I'm sure all of you, or some of you at least, remember from the last in-person event. So thanks again. Hope your minds are full and your cups are empty. And thank you very much. We hope to see you again very soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.